Manx Museum is 100 years old this year. It is home to an extraordinary collection of artefacts and archives that help tell the story of the Isle of Man and its people. To celebrate our centenary, we have curated a special exhibition and podcast, Museum 100, which will feature a kaleidoscope of treasures from our collections. Hello, I'm Katie King, Curator of Art and Social History for Manx National Heritage. Today I'm going to talk about an object connected to one of the most interesting characters from Manx history, Arthur Caley, the Sulby Giant. I'm also going to reveal a little more about the mystery and intrigue of his life. On display in the Manx Museum is an iron cast of Arthur Caley's hand, and it's certainly impressively large. The cast of the hand was probably made to cash in on Caley's fame, or to publicise the circuses for which he worked, and several examples are known to exist. They are now highly sought after by collectors of circus memorabilia. In our collections, we also have a pair of enormous leather boots that were worn by him, and some fantastic photographs showing his huge stature. The story of Arthur Caley is fascinating and full of twists and turns that are really quite extraordinary. From fake deaths to pistols at dawn, Arthur Caley led a very colourful life indeed. Arthur Caley was born in Sulby on the Isle of Man in 1824, the son of a farmer. As a teenager, it was noticed that he was exceptionally tall. He was a true giant in the sense that his limbs were in proportion to his body, and he's reported to have reached a height of 7 foot 8 inches whilst living on the island. He soon attracted attention because of his height and left the Isle of Man to work in a touring circus, where he would often appear alongside people of smaller stature in order to further emphasise his height. He toured throughout Europe. In 1853, his mother received a letter from Paris to say that her son had died and that a funeral had been held. It is now known that this was false, probably some sort of fraud on the part of his manager to claim life insurance money. A policy had been taken out shortly before his supposed death, and some rumours say that a tree was placed in the coffin instead of a body. A friend of Arthur Caley wrote to his parents saying he had been with Caley in Paris and that he had been very, very sick after being ill-treated by his manager. The Isle of Man appeared quite grief-stricken at the news. But the story of Arthur Caley doesn't end there. In 1859, some years later, Arthur Caley re-emerged in America, performing and touring circuses under the pseudonym Colonel Ruth Goshen, the Palestinian or Arabian giant. He was described as being 27 years old at the time and having been born in Jerusalem. For many years he toured the United States with the celebrated circus impresario P.T. Barnum and was part of the Greatest Show on Earth tour, now made famous by the film The Greatest Showman. He now claimed to be 7 foot 12 inches in height. In later life, he settled on a farm in Middlebush, New Jersey, with locals remembering him being visited by all sorts of colourful circus people, and that he would ride around town in an enormous carriage made especially for him. Arthur Caley's personal life appears to have been equally colourful, befitting someone who spent his life in the circus. He was married at least 3 times. His first wife, Augusta, was a German snake charmer who he met on tour. One summer, she eloped with Caley's friend and fellow performer John Sweet, taking with them $600 worth of silver, $70,000 worth of bonds, a goat, a horse, and a wagon. This theft led to a street altercation some years later, at which Caley threatened to kill John Sweet with a pistol he brandished, and then he beaten severely with a cane. Meanwhile, Caley has married again, to a lady called Mary Louise, the cousin of a fat lady who he once toured with. They soon divorced, with each claiming the other was unfaithful. During the divorce, it came out in court that he was not really Arabian, but most likely from Lancaster. Arthur Caley, or Colonel Ruth Goshen as the records state, died in 1889 and is buried in Middlebush, New Jersey. There was no tombstone for fear he might be exhumed and put on display. His funeral was described in the newspaper in the following manner. The farmhouse of the dead giant was thronged with villagers long before the hour fixed for the funeral. The remains have been placed in a coffin 8 feet long and 3 feet wide. It was covered with cloth and has been specially made. After the funeral services were over, the coffin was borne on the shoulder of 8 sturdy farmers to a wagon. The undertaker said he could not find a hearse large enough to hold the giant's coffin. A large crowd followed the remains to the Middlebush Cemetery, where the interment took place. The connection between Arthur Caley and his alias Colonel Goshen was not well known by the public for many, many years after Caley's death in 1889. In the last month of his life, it was reported that Goshen told that his real name was the similar-sounding Arthur Crowley, that he'd been born on the Isle of Man about 70 years before, and that the stories previously told about his life were all lies. It is not known whether his parents ever knew of the truth about his apparent resurrection in America, but intriguingly, in his will, he left money to his sister, Margaret Caley Gelling, who had also emigrated to America and was now living in New York. So there ends the tale of one of the Isle of Man's most curious characters.